So today, I'm reading again from the Visions of Catherine Emmerich, and I decided to do his adversaries, which is another section of this book. I split it up into two parts because it's like 14 pages in here, but the reason I split it up, there's a lot of photographs in here, but I split it up because I don't want to put out 35 minutes videos like I did yesterday. And it's probably like yesterday it was worth it. It was on the Virgin Mary. Today, well, it's just his enemies. Anyway, without further ado, the earliest adversaries of Jesus. Adversaries as a child. Foe of Jesus stepped forward right from the beginning. Such was the opposition of Herod and his minions, set in motion by the appearance of the three kings, which led to Herod's attempt to apprehend them, the interrogation of Joseph in Bethlehem, the attempt to shut off access to the crib cave, and finally, the preparations for and accomplishment of the murder of the innocents. Now, obviously, they're talking about the children that were killed by Herod the Great in Bethlehem when he heard that the child was going to be born there. Anyways, let's move on. Adversaries as a youth. Opposition to Jesus during the years of his youth set in especially when, as a 12-year-old, he taught in the temple, exploding the pride and vanity of the older scribes and Pharisees who gathered around him. They regarded Jesus at the time as a gifted boy whose pert and saucy attitude needed amending. Someone later accused Jesus of hypocrisy for the way he disputed with and undermined the scholars present, addressing them as though he sought their instruction, saying such things as, "What do you mean by that?" or "Do tell us, if you will, when the Messiah will come," but in truth mocking for the benefits of others by demonstrating for all to see that he knew better. Adversaries as a young man. In Nazareth, Mary and Joseph suffered much from the shenanigans of many mean-spirited Jews who were envious of this wise son of a carpenter who seemed to know far more than they fancied they themselves did, and whose holy manner of life put them to shame. In order that he might be better protected from such a persecution after his father Joseph had died, Levi, a close friend of considerable means from Capernaum, offered Jesus and Mary a house, to which they then removed. But even here miscreants soon began to provoke him as he set out on short journeys with friends. Primary adversary as an adult, the Pharisees. The first teaching journeys of Jesus' ministry had scarcely begun when groups of his primary adversary, the Pharisees, began to appear. At first, their opposition took the form of accusations of such offenses as that he and his companions whispered among themselves and spread seeds of discontent. At his first public sermon in Nazareth on July 31st, AD 29, they mocked the poverty of his parents, saying, "Little butter and honey have we seen you eat with your father, the poor carpenter." And it says in brackets, see Isaiah 7, verse 15. And when in his sermons Jesus spoke of his Father, who had sent him and whose will he was to fulfill, the Pharisees, not understanding that he spoke of God, would ridicule him, saying among themselves, but loudly enough for all to hear, He speaks always of his father, but he is not from Nazareth. Is he not from Nazareth, and the son of a poor carpenter? In the same way, they ridiculed this parable of the owner of the vineyard who sent his son among the vine dressers, saying of him, "Did his father, the poor carpenter of Nazareth, own a vineyard?" They would scornfully point out his lack of education, saying, "Just 3 months ago his father, the carpenter, was still living, and they were working together. Yet now, after a few brief travels abroad, he returns and straightway imparts his wisdom." Their insinuations grew all the more severe as, hard as they may knock their heads together, they could not ascertain from what source of instruction Jesus could have obtained his knowledge, saying, "Whence has he such exposition of Holy Writ? Was not his time in the elementary school at Nazareth but short? How came he by such understanding of art and science? What is to be done with him?" Subtext: accusations of social impropriety. To disdain for Jesus' modest origins and limited education were soon added criticisms regarding his personal and civic responsibilities. He was accused of neglecting his filial duties. If he were even marginally righteous, he would stay at home and look after his mother. After his father, the poor carpenter Joseph, died, he would have assured his mother's livelihood by taking up a trade. And yet, with his father now gone, his son lets his father's carpentry business go. In a similar vein, they reviled him on account of his itinerancy. "He is ever under way, one knows not whither nor whence. But be assured that when he does appear, whether in town or countryside, commotion is sure to follow. Why does he not stay by his mother's side?" At the same time, they reprove him for his manner on those occasions when he does appear. "How comes it that he speaks with such bold certainty? By what right does he make his demands and call others to repentance?" More hostile still were the accusations the Pharisees leveled against his religious conduct. "He profanes the Sabbath by causing disturbances, inciting crowds, and healing the sick. He forgives sin. But whence has he the authority to do such a thing? He does not keep the fast, and grants his disciples also far too much latitude in this regard, thereby showing disrespect for the law. He shows himself willing to take gold from those enamored of him, and then distributes the monies received to the poor upon his own discretion, thereby depriving the synagogue of rightful alms. He attracts wealthy widows in order to gain their inheritance. Indeed, he says plainly that he is the Son of God, the Messiah, thereby blaspheming God himself. Finally, the Pharisees complain of his civic and social behavior in associating with tax collectors, Samaritans, and especially Sichemites, not to mention his doings in their own communities with pagans, and also among diaspora Jews. Not only this, but he is accused of going about in the countryside with women of ill repute. For it is common knowledge that some among those whom he has converted were formerly profligate sinners. I've never seen that word, sorry. Above all, they decry how the people are agitated whenever and wherever Jesus appears, how at his mountain sermons he propagandizes, how he blesses children, visits people in their homes, addresses women so directly, how he chooses without proper sanction which cities and towns he will visit, and when he joins gatherings in the places he visits, avoids those considered the leading figures and dignitaries of the place, and how, despite the fact that he lacks any authorization from the temple, as well as any diploma or scholarly training of any sort, he nonetheless teaches publicly. Subtext: allegations of disruptive actions. When Jesus left Capernaum after his first major period of teaching, the town elders and Pharisees came together, saying, "Such uproar and unrest this man leaves in his wake. Normal routine is disturbed, and people abandon their tasks to gather around him. He casts insults and reprimands upon all and sundry with the severest of words," or severest of words. "He seeks out simple folk as against the lettered, and admits even pagans to the kingdom he never ceases to announce. Never does he consult with men of learning, nor speak with town officials to make arrangements before he heals the sick. In whatever city or town he may be, he acts as though its synagogue belongs to him, teaching now by the sea, now among fishermen, now in the mountains, however might suit him best, coming and going with no notice, as though there were no civic order to be maintained." The Pharisees were sorely tried when, in the city of Dothan, Jesus gave his sanction and blessing to the marriage of the elderly merchant Issachar to the young Salome, a union that could not be blessed with children and so was contrary to the law. But Jesus made plain their true malevolent motive. They had hoped Issachar's ancestral state would fall to them upon his death. But now there would be other heirs on the newly wedded wife's side, and so they caused a rumor to be spread abroad that Jesus had benefited much from Issachar's largesse, and that his disciples were spent in lazy men whom Jesus let feed and revel at other men's tables. All this and the uproar that followed him wherever he went were, according to the Pharisees, to be seen as the pernicious effects of his teaching, for which the teacher himself would be held accountable. Subtext: suspicions of the Pharisees. In addition to accusations fabricated from events such as those just mentioned, the Pharisees also carefully promulgated suppositions and suspicions of all sorts. He must have entered into some sort of liaison with foreigners, for he is always talking about the coming of a new kingdom, the nearness of the Messiah, and the destruction of Jerusalem. Yet, yes, his father Joseph was of noble lineage, but see how low the family has fallen. Perhaps Jesus is secretly the son of another and very powerful father who is seeking to clandestinely mobilize a cohort of followers with whom to seize control of Judea when a suitable opportunity presents itself. However they may be, that may be, we may be sure an impressive apparatus and source of support must stand behind him. For how otherwise could he so boldly step forward as though within his rights to controvert all custom and overturn all legal authority? Not only this, but recall how often he is absent. What might this not augur as to some sinister alliance? The Pharisees in Capernaum, furious when on November 17th AD 30, Jesus not only healed two scribes suffering from leprosy, but then forgave them their sins, screamed, "He heals on the Sabbath? And how is it that he forgives sins? It must be that the devil helps him. Clearly he is a madman, for see how he runs hither and yon. Scarcely has he finished creating a spectacle here before he appears of a sudden in Nain, awakening the dead, and then he is in Megiddo, only to reappear here shortly thereafter. This is not the way of a man in his right mind. Some great and evil spirit animates him, some devil who evokes in him the highest devil of all. Why does he spend his nights alone and in the open among upon the mountains? He must be cavorting with Beelzebul himself, and from thence drawing his knowledge and power." Subtext: the fears of the Pharisees. Notwithstanding all their blustering reproaches, in truth, many of Jesus' adversaries among the Pharisees harbored a real fear of the future. What if this carpenter's son really is the Messiah, and not only no Pharisees, but in fact our enemy? What would become of us? What part would we have in this kingdom? What if one of these days he proclaims himself king and has on his side not only the people but the Romans as well? He says Kaiser is owed his taxes and Pontius Pilate lets him be. Is he perhaps using Jesus as a foil against his greatest opponent, Herod Antipas? Yet Herod is himself so superstitious that he regards Jesus as the risen Baptist, whom in his heart he always honored and feared. One night after Jesus had finished teaching, the Pharisees gathered together to study ancient writings concerning the Messiah. They openly confessed their misgivings, for in truth, many associations could be drawn between the wisdom sayings regarding the Messiah and Jesus. The following day, Jesus set their anxiety at rest, reminding them of God's benevolent providence, and that anyone of good will who put their trust in God had nothing to fear. Subtext: surveillance. Gradually, the Pharisees moved beyond accusation, suspicion, and fear, and found ways to restrict the movements of Jesus, even impede his activity altogether. On one occasion, the major centers of learning in Judea and Jerusalem sent a commission of 15 Pharisees to Capernaum to listen in on his teachings and document his actions. Another time, 50 Pharisees were dispatched on the pretext of visiting the synagogue. Once arrived, they broke into smaller groups and followed Jesus wherever he went in order to report back their findings to Capernaum and Jerusalem. Subtext: disputation and interrogation. It was customary that those present in a synagogue, while a sermon was being held, might interrupt the speaker to put questions and start a discussion, a practice that through collusion was to put to good in frequent use by the Pharisees. For the most part, their efforts were aimed at enticing the despised teacher Jesus onto thin ice in hopes of catching him in some contradiction of the law. Then after the sermon, they would surround Jesus, and one would step forward to speak, the others then following suit, as had been previously arranged, in order to provoke an indignant outcry and thereby intimidate the common people standing by. Even banquets came to be used as opportunities to tempt Jesus into taking a false step. Now and then a high-ranking Pharisee would invite Jesus to dine at his house, where beforehand plans had been laid as to what questions would be asked and what objections raised, all with a view to glean from what Jesus said some incriminating words to send on to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. Likewise, as Jesus was preaching in the synagogues, certain Pharisees would, upon an agreed-upon signal, mutter and generally set off a disturbance, sometimes suddenly and with great ostentation, quitting the room as well. Subtext: conspicuous impediments. One of the most obvious obstacles put in the way of Jesus and his teaching was the outright closure of the synagogue where he was to teach, and the withholding of the keys. Under such circumstances, Jesus would then teach either in the nearby marketplace or on the town's teaching hill. Or again, it might happen that merely by laying his hands on a synagogue door, it would swing instantly open in response to his spiritual power. Something similar occurred on March 1, AD 33, in the temple in the case of a locked grating surrounding the teaching seat. Years earlier, on September 4th, AD 29, in Kimki, as furious Pharisees went so far as to extinguish the temple lamps. While Jesus was speaking, the master slipped away unnoticed during the ensuing commotion. Another method the Pharisees employed was to send letters to the chiefs of the synagogues, forbidding them to permit Jesus to preach on their premises. However, this ploy rarely worked for fear of the people's reactions. To counter this latter, messages would be distributed among the people, admonishing them for the sake of public order and safety not to congregate in crowds, not to bring forward the sick, not to rejoice should they encounter the prophet, not to leave their regular employments, not to accept invitations by the disciples of Jesus to participate in the sermons on the Mount, and to always keep women and children at home. Already at the time of the first Passover, April 6 AD 30, during the ministry of Jesus, the Pharisees, slinking about among the people, had let it be known that during the festival no one was to associate with Jesus, follow after him, or chatter and gossip about him. Worse still were the disturbances set in motion after Jesus had spoken by individuals hired for the purpose and who would afterward lie in wait for Jesus and his disciples, hurling stones at them as they passed by. We know that, and it says here, Luke 4, chapter 4, verse 29, that a plan was set in motion when Jesus was in Nazareth on August 12, AD 30, to cast him down from a nearby mountain. On the occasion of their festival journey, January 25th, AD 31, 64 Pharisees from the regions around Capernaum met together to set up a commission to closely interrogate those who had been healed by Jesus. They investigated the best-known teachings and also intentionally caught off guard some of the recently healed, whom they sequestered and quizzed about their alleged former ailments, harshly disputing the reality of their supposed healings and raising a hue and cry about things for which they had in public but recently shown tolerance. You can read John 9 for that. They did this in John 9. Subtext: appealed to the Sanhedrin. The Pharisees' final and greatest hope in their campaign against Jesus lay in the high court or Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. Already on July 27, AD 29, the Sanhedrin sent letters to all major municipal centers of Palestine, those with schools of law and leading politicians, enjoining them to pay special heed to one whom the Baptists had pronounced to be he whose coming had long been looked for and who would soon seek his baptism. They were to keep a keen lookout for, so they said, if this man truly were the Messiah, he would not have no need of John's baptism. They were especially vexed, moreover, because it was said the one to whom the Baptist spoke was the same who as a mere 12-year-old lad had taught in the temple. In October AD 29, the Sanhedrin for the first time promulgated a decree regarding the troublesome new prophet out of Nazareth. Prior to this, reports from bribed informants planted throughout the region had been gathered together. Now, the Sanhedrin, consisting of 71 priests and scribes, was called to assembly. 20 of those were selected to form a commission, and then 5 of those chosen to meet as representatives in council. They consulted the family registers and could not dispute the fact that both Joseph and Mary were in the line of David, and Mary's mother Anne in that of Aaron. But the families had fallen into some obscurity, and Jesus was known to associate with servants, common laborers, and other such rabble. He defiled himself, mixing with tax collectors and pagans, and even associated with slaves. It was reported that only recently Jesus had been in the vicinity of Bethlehem among the Sichemites, who had left their day labors and come to a house where Jesus discoursed with them, September 28, AD 29, in Beth Arabah, in so intimate and familiar a manner that it was put forward that with such a following he might well foment an uprising. Some held the view that he was quite likely a changeling who at the right moment would proclaim himself the son of a king. In addition, it seemed Jesus must have received secret instruction, no doubt from the devil, for it was reported that he would often leave the company of others and wander alone in the desert, or, as has already been said, among the high hills and mountains. It was such deliberations as these that led to the high decree broadcast far and wide that Jesus was clearly a student of the devil. Yes, his teachings could not be denied, nor his teaching repudiated, but questions remained as to how all this was possible. During the period May 4 to 18 AD 30, the throng seeking baptism at Ono, now that Jesus had bestowed his capacity also on Andrew, Saturnin, Peter, and James the Greater, stirred up yet more of a sensation among the Pharisees. They caused letters to be sent to the heads of the synagogues throughout the lands, instructing them to seize Jesus wherever he might appear and to arrest and interrogate his disciples regarding his teachings, and where they erred, to set them right. It was at this time, the beginning of June AD 30, that with scarcely any effort, Peter, Andrew, and John, who had been apprehended and handcuffed in Genebris, broke their chains and, to their astonishment, escaped. At this juncture, Jesus withdrew for about 2 months from his public teaching. On June 5th, AD 32, the Pharisees in Jericho sent messengers to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem in order to obtain full legal authority to arrest Jesus, as well as guidance on how best to accomplish this. The disciples were concerned for Jesus and begged him to retreat, but he continued peacefully on his way. A month later, on July 26th, AD 32, the raising of Lazarus from death brought on a great commotion in the vicinity of the castle in Bethany. A multitude came to the place from Jerusalem, among them many guards. In Jerusalem the Sanhedrin conferred through the night on the matter. It was feared that Jesus might awaken many more from the dead, which would cause chaos regarding questions of inheritance. And around noon that same day a tumult broke out in Bethany itself. Lazarus was obliged to conceal himself in a cellar beneath the castle. Jesus, meanwhile, had during the night reached Perea on the far side of the Jordan, and shortly thereafter left Capernaum on a 3-month journey to Mesopotamia, Chaldea, and Egypt. Upon his return, the Sanhedrin was quickly notified that the Nazarene was again active in full view. The Pharisees in Sichem threatened him with arrest or extradition, but Jesus told them that there was no need, as he was just then leaving for Jerusalem anyway. That Jesus at this time, as well as on other occasions, escaped arrest, in that, with few minor exceptions, was able to teach unhindered through February and March AD 33, can only be explained by the same powerful will that had already long before, and also right up to his final arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane, led all things to pass in union with the will of the Heavenly Father. Subtext: the decision to put Jesus to death. The Pharisees' initial decision to kill Jesus was taken after he healed the man with the withered hand in Capernaum on December 2, AD 30. At that time, the Pharisees met with the Herodians and planned how best to waylay Jesus at the coming Passover. Mark chapter 3, verse 6. For its part, the Sanhedrin had already, by dawn of July 27 AD 32, the day after the raising of Lazarus, that Jesus must die. John chapter 11, verses 47 to 53. After Jesus delivered a sermon in the temple on March 7 AD 33, those gathered at the time in the house of the high priest Caiaphas, let it be known that none were hereafter to take Jesus or his disciples into house or inn. And it was when they learned, notwithstanding this decree, that Jesus was lodged with Lazarus in Bethany, that they took the decision to kill Lazarus also. John 12, verses 9 to 11. After Jesus cleansed the temple for the second time, March 13 AD 33, the priests and scribes considered with great care how they might put an end to him, and yet they feared Jesus also, for his teachings had made a great impression on the people. Mark chapter 11, verse 18. The following day they tried to lay hold of him, but in the end, their fear of the people got the upper hand and they abandoned their plan to arrest him. Luke chapter 20, verse 19. Then on March 26, they gathered together again in the palace of Caiaphas to work out some stratagem whereby they might apprehend and kill Jesus. But as they said, not during the feast, let a tumult rise among the people. Matthew chapter 26, verses 3 to 5. Here it was that Judas came to their aid. Matthew chapter 26, verse 14. Subtext: unexpected incidents. Among the stumbling blocks Jesus in his wisdom and power set in the way of the measures taken by the Pharisees and so angered them belong first and foremost the many occasions when anticipated incidents would abruptly undo the plans and expectations of these malefactors. In Chithloth Tabor, for example, on September 1st AD 29, Jesus foiled their scheme to engage him in debate by suddenly causing the poor of the city to be invited to the banquet, while at the same time reminding the quarrelsome priests and scribes of the rights of the poor, which both disconcerted and disarmed them. On another occasion, when Pharisees were spying on him in hopes of finding cause to rightly accuse him of violating the Sabbath, Jesus performed no healings. Then again, during a discussion on questions of divorce, Jesus exposed their unlawful interpolations into martial law, even offering concrete evidence of what lay behind their machinations. Scheduled inquiries, Jesus sometimes circumvented by not appearing at meals to which he had been invited for that purpose, but instead healing the sick in front of the house in which dinner was to be held, so that the Pharisees would thereby made to bear unwilling witness to the jubilations of the healed. Even more, and against the law and custom, women and children would appear also, expressing their joy even more loudly than the rest. Those who had been healed would go to the temple or a nearby synagogue and proclaim their testimony before the Pharisees, who would forthwith contest their healing and accuse them of disturbing the peace. Here and there, one possessed would appear without warning in the midst of a discussion and be healed by Jesus. In short, matters often took a very different turn than the antagonists had intended. Final subtext, and this video is way longer than I wanted it to be, but so it is. Failed threats and apprehendings. In many cases, the failure of assailants and attempted arrests can be attributed to perfectly straightforward causes. For example, Jesus might prove he was in the right by appeal to the custom of the land or to Mosaic law. The fear of breaking those laws on the part of the Pharisees or other adversaries would prevent his capture. An equally effective deterrent being that the multitude was often on the side of Jesus, as for example on such joyful occasions as the cleansing of the temple and the major sermons or healings. At such times, even his adversaries could not but be in awe of Jesus. Or again, he might disarm them with answers that left them speechless, or with parables that revealed the true character of an auditor, whereby others among them would take malicious pleasure at the unmasking of their companion. Yet, before long, they would fall back, full of annoyance, into their former wrath. However, most cases of fending off threats and provocation can only be explained by the supernatural power of the God-man. Already, through nightly prayers to his heavenly Father, Jesus was in truth directing the events of the coming days, intercepting the schemes of his adversaries, and as often as not, leaving them totally perplexed. Then again, his appearance was often enough to disarm his opponents, for he could at will stand before them on one occasion as the purest, most humble and peaceful of men, and on another evoke awe in all present, and some even an enigmatic respect. At such times, Jesus might pass unmolested among his adversaries, despite the fact that he was ready to hand, or they could so easily have apprehended him. Or else he might disappear entirely from their sight, as he had done in Nazareth on August 12, AD 30, when they sought to cast him down from the mountain. These supernatural gifts were apparent at the cleansings of the temple also, when the money changers shrank back from Jesus. And not only on account of the strap he wielded, as the priests hurrying to the scene shortly thereafter did not interfere either, out of shame for the disarray that they let take hold. The two remarkable theophanies that gave witness to Jesus in the temple through a darkening of the sky or eclipse and an enigmatic voice from on high, which both cases again silenced his adversaries, are among public miracles considered elsewhere. So that's the end of the reading for today. Now, the reason why I went further than what I was supposed to is because I wanted to finish all of the things the Pharisees were doing to him. One of the things I noted is when they weren't able to argue against him, they tried to censor him and they tried to stir up hysteria against him. And the devil works that way then. He works that way now. You'll see it. If you remember the whole hysteria that happened 3 years ago, what were they doing? Whenever people were telling the truth, they were censoring them and calling it disinformation and controlling all the social medias to cancel those people. And it's almost the same thing as happening in the church with the efforts of the Vatican trying to shut down the traditional mass. There's no reason they should be shutting down the traditional mass when they virtually tolerate every other mass except for the one that was given at the Council of Trent. And that's what makes the whole thing ridiculous. Is that there's a lot of people who come out and defend the Vatican, especially the head of the church, for doing these things, yet what are they afraid of? That's the real question. What are they afraid of? Why are they acting in fear of the Mass that made most of the saints? That's the question everyone should be asking. And they accuse those who attend the Latin Mass and their communities, which are growing in number, not decreasing, like the rest of the church, which is massively decreasing, especially in holy orders. When they go against these people and they're increasing, you wonder, well, what are you afraid of? Why are you accusing them of being Pharisees when you yourselves are acting like Pharisees, who clearly conspired to silence Jesus in whatever way possible? Now, the traditional Latin Mass is going basically through all of these motions, and they're attempted to be silenced. So, take from this reading what you will. But this is what I noticed. Thank you for listening. Ave Maria.